Well, hello, friends, and welcome to the Imago Nutrition Podcast. My name is Mark Glesney, and I am one of your hosts, along with Danielle Glesney. And this is the podcast where we answer your questions and give you practical nutrition strategies to help you and your family flourish. And so, speaking of families flourishing, if you are a parent, or to be honest, anyone that has some sort of varying degree of influence on a child or an adolescent's nutritional options or routine. This is going to be, I think, an eye-opening episode for you. And so if you have any questions, by the way, you can always send those to us. We love answering real questions from real people and giving you real solutions. And so if you have a question, you can shoot that to us by going to our website, Imago Nutrition, IMAGO nutrition.com/podcast. There's just a little form there. You can just shoot over that question that you have been wanting to ask a nutrition professional for a while now, whether it's related to this topic or anything else. And we look through those, and that is how we garner a lot of the topics for episodes. And so with that, Danielle, I did not tell you I was going to do this, but today's kind of a big day, right?
It is.
Why don't you explain the day that we're recording this, at least? Why don't you explain what today is, sort of what has led up to this and what I'm alluding to when I say today is kind of a big day?
Yeah. So today is the first day I'm fully going to devote my time to Imago career-wise.
Wow,
so
look at that.
Yes, I finished my career of 12 years. So it felt good and weird, and I'm excited. So yeah,
And we had the announcement on social media today, again at the time of this recording, and so yeah, it's out there now, and so it's been fun, working together these last couple of years, and now as I joked, I think earlier on a text today, now the real work begins, right? So
Yes.
now you're transitioning from this being a side business, into a full-time role, and so lots more to come on that. And so all that's to say, I don't know if we planned this. Did we plan this? But this is the perfect topic to talk about on today. And so because, you really have a passion and a heart for family nutrition, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm being honest, this is a place where you far, far exceed me. I love working with adults. I love working with individuals, couples, but don't have very much range or experience working with, children or adolescents. I've worked with some, high school athletes, et cetera, et cetera. So I've touched down into this age range just barely. So it's a very fascinating topic, I think, and I know you've got a lot of relevant statistics and guidance today that's going to be, I think, really eye-opening for me and hopefully for a lot of our listeners as well. So with that, here's the question. It's a really big one. We did a little bit of research, and this is actually a huge question being asked online in general as well. Okay. And so the question that we're going to be digging into today is, what are the dietary guidelines for children and adolescents? All right. And so with that, why don't you kind of get us started? What do we mean when we say children? What do we mean when we talk about adolescents? And then let's start digging into what are the actual guidelines? What are some of the trends we're seeing? What are some of the issues that are arising? Why don't you start walking us through that, Danielle, and I'll just pop in with questions because I'm here to learn as well.
Okay, great. So this is a huge age range. In the dietary guidelines for Americans, it's 2020 to 2025. This is what we're looking at today. So it includes the ages of 2 to 18 that we're going to focus on for this podcast today. So, and if you think about age 2 to 18, it's full of transitions. So, you start with young children, toddlers, obviously very dependent on their adult or care provider to give them food and snacks and meals and beverages. And then they, grow a little bit, go to school. And so then they're more exposed to new foods and have a little more opportunity to choose foods. So, the school lunch or birthday parties, going out a little bit more where food is maybe more provided. So then you transition, of course, to adolescence, where you have a lot an even greater independence level. And so there's more time spent with peers and all that goes into that. So, yeah, so that is what we're going to really talk about is first, what the trends are showing as far as the current intakes and how that compares to the recommendations.
Nice.
So first, what is great is toddlers, our infants and toddlers start off really good. So their fruit intake specifically is about adequate for 60%. So over half of the toddlers, 2 to 4, are getting adequate fruit. And so there's a couple other components, but these are really great. But unfortunately, before they're established as habits, the diet quality goes down early childhood and then through adolescence. So I really think this is a great opportunity to look into for intervention, or how can we improve, is why do we start off really well and then kind of go down from there? So when you look at the guidelines, it gives you a health index score. And this is, again, comparing your intake versus the recommendations. So ages 2 to 4 get the score of 61. And so 61 is actually out of 100. So it's still not a great score. But it is only going down from there. So adolescents get a whopping score of 51. So that is the scary part to me, is that, they start off really good. Well, a little better than 50%, and then it goes down from there. So by late, oh, go ahead.
Do you have any sense of, I'm just, as a parent of 3, and having seen, my kids come up through these ages, I've got some thoughts or guts, but any thought about why? It's such a tight turnaround that they're doing adequate, per the guidelines, and then it just starts to tank. And by the way, it should be a little, that stat kind of even catches me off guard. It's sort of like, hey, most of the people in your class are getting a 61%. You're like, that's not great at all,
Right.
And so I know that's not an exact equivalence with, a letter score versus what we're talking about, but this is kind of what we're talking about. And so I'm curious your thoughts on why that rapid decline. Is it with the independence? Is it with parents? Is it with picky eating? What are some of the what are some of the thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. 61 is not a favorite number for me. I would rather it be higher, especially because they're so young. Most of that intake, is in the parents' control.
Yeah, it's dictated.
What'd you say?
Yeah, it's dictated, really.
Right.
They're going to eat,
I guess some toddlers are running to the pantry and grabbing things.
Yeah,
so,
that's true.
But I think the cause of the decline is, just not handling the picky eating really well. Picky eating is a very normal stage, and it can pass pretty quickly. But unfortunately, with good intentions, trying to manage it can actually make it go longer. So, yeah, I think that is what we're going to talk about today, is just what would be some good things to do to decrease the length of picky eating, because it's almost, 90, I'm just going to throw out a number. I would say 90% of people, at least of kids, are going to experience picky at some point.
Yeah, sure.
And then the other one is just healthy habits, maybe not modeled in the house. Yeah. So they're, starting off really excited to feed their child, and then, just life, gets in the way, or the excitement goes down, and it's just they're starting to eat what the parents are eating, per se. So I think in this topic, I love how you kind of, included other people. So this is also a great, episode just for parents to listen to, because their intake is is definitely going to be mirrored in their children's.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll talk about that too.
And we
But
know we've got kids that spend a lot of time with, whether it's aunt and uncles or grandparents, maybe during the
yes,
day, grandma's watching the kids, or, there's a lot more influence than just parent-child dynamic, and so we're talking about, thinking about that sphere of influence that you have on the kids in your life, and modeling, what that looks like. So yeah, I'm
right,
excited to get into it.
right. Okay, so what we can see as you get older, the amounts or recommendations increase, and that is another reason that there's a potential for why our health index score goes down too.
Mm.
Is like the amounts are just not being going up as well with the age of the child. And that really, it's not like we want our kid to eat more. That's not what we want to do. But the amount you offer the foods, the frequency in which you offer the foods is maybe not as high as it should be. So if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, because you can keep, it's kind of, I guess, it's like percentages, right? And actual intake, and as the standard gets a little higher, even if you're holding the same, intake as a percentage, it's actually going to decrease your score.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
all right. Hopefully there's some good news in here somewhere.
Well, just an example of that. So at age 9, the recommended dairy increases from 2.5 cups to 3 cups a day. And when I say cups, I mean cup equivalent. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Right. So younger kids, younger than 9, their intake is close to recommended. But older than 9 is when it is below. So the whole grains and seafood is really infrequently consumed by any age youth. So that is a huge area of opportunity. So whole grains and seafood. And then here is kind of interesting. The amount of refined and whole grains remains consistent across the age groups. So we're not getting adequate whole grains, but the amount that we are getting of the refined and whole grains is consistent throughout the age groups. You can get about 50% of their total grains is coming from mixed dishes such as pizza, pasta, sandwiches, tacos, burgers, and then about 20% of the total grains is coming from snacks and sweets. So I think snacks is another great thing to think about, because when we're talking about frequency, those are between meals. And so that's a great way to offer the fruit or the vegetable for the second or third time, or the whole grain. So
wow.
A little bit more on the intake side is total protein intake. This is probably a shocker. This is a little good news here. The total protein intake is generally met through all targets. So I think what I hear a lot from parents is they are concerned about their child's protein intake. And so one thing to remember is actually just much lower than I think the parents are realizing. And the intake data shows that all age groups are meeting it, except for females 14 to 18. So that's a good positive note for you.
That's interesting too. I mean, not to nitpick on that, because that is, good news on the whole. Interesting too is that protein and its interaction with hormones and enzymes, etc. And for females to be missing that in a pretty critical time of development between that 14 to 18. So that's something that if you've got a daughter, a niece, something like that between that 14 to 18, that could cause issues down the road, So again, not looking to major in the minors on that regard. It sounds like we are doing pretty well. And that's something that we all, I think, have to evolve to. And what you're saying is that parents think that protein needs to be a lot higher than it is. It's not that they think their kids are getting more. They think that standard is actually a lot higher. And, we see this in fitness culture too, even up through adults. They're like, oh, a gram of protein per pound of body weight. Well, not really. It's not as much as you'd think. A better number is like, 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight or something like that. So it's a lot lower than people think. Still incredibly important. But that's a silver lining there amid the
Mm-hmm.
data. So that's good to hear. So you know me, I'm a big fan of protein. So I know you are too.
Yeah. What I pointed out too in my class that I just finished this week was that there's so many different sources of protein. And I think sometimes we really just focus on the meat. And then
Hmm.
if you think about females, they're not typically big favored. That's not
Right.
typically their favorite food is meat.
Right.
And that could be a stereotype or something, but really thinking about other sources of protein in your grains like quinoa, or your nuts and seeds, or soy like edamame and tofu, or
Hmm.
um, yeah, dairy. That's
Yeah,
another
I was
great.
going to say dairy, and you mentioned seafood too. It's again just having this eclectic. We want this wide array. When I
Right.
think people misconstrue sometimes when I focus and speak on protein, they think I'm just talking about meat, right? Because you even go to restaurants and like pick your protein, and what is that? They're not asking you if you want edamame. They're asking you
Yeah.
to pick your meat. Really that's what it is. And so remember that protein is a nutrient. It's not a food category, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you can find it, yes, in lean meat, but seafood, dairy, fruit, whole grains, even, nuts and seeds. And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, so there's just opening up, this wide array of sources of protein is obviously good guidance.
Mm-hmm. So to summarize kind of what we've talked about so far, I would say to improve the dietary patterns that we're seeing, we want to maintain the fruit and dairy intake from early childhood. That's where we're doing well. And
Mm,
then increase our veggies, whole grains, and seafood.
mm,
So that's the big summary point
I like that.
that we're seeing. So maintaining the fruit and dairy intake, and then increasing the veggies, whole grains, and seafood. We're probably not going to touch on a lot of this today, but we're also, of course, going to be wanting to reduce the intake of added sugar, saturated fat, and
Mm,
sodium. So, with what we're talking about, I think those things can happen naturally if we just focus on the positive as far as those nutrient dense foods, having them really readily visible in your house. So, when
mm,
you look at your countertops, what do you see? Do you see a bowl of fruit? Do you see some tomatoes or avocados? When you open the fridge, what's the first thing you see? Do you see fruits and veggies, or are they buried in the drawers?
mm.
When you open the pantry, do you see dried fruit, nuts, and whole grains, or do you see chips and
Right.
sweets?
Yep.
So that is just a huge thing to start with, is just getting the food in the house, the freezer, the fridge, the pantry, the countertops, so that, if it's visible, it's more likely to be used and not go bad.
And I know we've touched on this in some small way in the past, but grocery stores have been studying this for decades and decades. I mean, they place food in a certain place for a reason, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's no reason that we can't then do the same thing as parents, as guardians, as folks that are influential over the lives of children, is by having a purpose with what you see when you walk into your kitchen, into your pantry, into your fridge,
Mm-hmm.
and being smart about that, not because you're trying to maximize profits like a grocery store, which isn't all bad, but because you're trying to guide and influence decisions for a healthier outcome long term. So something to
Mm-hmm.
think about too is I love the way you say that. Just walk into your kitchen right now. If you're listening to this on your headphones, you're at home, just walk in and look around. Maybe you see nothing on your countertops. Maybe it's time to bring out a bowl of fruit, or maybe it's time to swap what is seen on your countertops for something like fresh fruit, etc. And so something to think about, again, just from a not a marketing perspective, but from a visual connection, like a visual connection piece with
Mm-hmm.
our food choices.
Well, your favorite guy, Menno Hesselman, put
Oh
that
yeah,
in one of
Menno.
his tips, when he summarized 120 studies on how to get kids to eat healthy.
Yep.
One was just that we have kind of an internal menu based on food cues in our environment. So
Yep.
I thought that was really powerful to think about. Like, it's, your kids are seeing commercials probably. So
Yep.
why not help with the other side of
Yep,
that? They're
and it
seeing,
helps with adults too. I mean, it
yeah,
has a benefit to us as well. So,
right.
yeah, and the
Exactly.
resource you're referencing to is the author is Menno Henselman's. The book is actually called. That was an article from his website
Yeah.
actually. So you can go to mennohenselmans.com. I was thinking of his book, The Science of Self Control, which we both read and has nutrition and fitness and productivity and such. So yeah, there's a great article on Menno Henselman's website. If you just Google that, like I think it's like 8 tips to get your kids to eat healthy or something like that. So just Google that long string, you'll find the article. Props to Menno, we love his work. So yeah, it's a terrific place to start.
Right. Okay, so just to take a look at those recommendations, we kind of just talked about the intake so far. So I'm not going to read, obviously, like, how many cups and based on your age and things like that, and female versus male, because that's really extensive charts in that document. So if you want to go to the Dietary Guidelines for Americans 2020-2025, you're going to see all those specifics as far as how many fruits and veggies per age group and per gender.
And maybe I should have done this at the top, but that's a great point. This is not a secret, by the way. This is not something that as nutrition professionals or as a registered dietitian that you have access to that no one else does, right? Like this is completely accessible to the public. The government does that on purpose. And by the way, it's not the government coming up with these. They use third-party, professionals and expertise to put together these recommendations. So, leave the whole conspiracy theories at the door for this. So yeah, you can do exactly that. You can Google the Dietary Guidelines for Americans and pull down the PDF for free. You can either just read it digitally, you can print it out. So that's a good point, just as an aside, which is these are not secrets. And what we teach with our clients are not secrets, right? And so what we give away for free on the Imago Nutrition podcast is not secrets. It's out there. We just are happy to be a conduit to get folks into that. So that's a great point too, is that you can go dig into these. It's a big document. I forget how many pages it is. Yeah. I have it downloaded. It's a large document, but it does have a great index, and you can find the pertinent areas to you and dig into each section by section. And so it's a fascinating thing. So, I think it's a great exercise to at least go download it and look at some of the, the topics and the contents, the table of contents, and just dig into it a little bit, because this is available to the public. It's just that a lot of folks don't know it or don't go to it.
Right. I think they have a lot of great graphs, making it the reading fast and easy. So
it's gotten a lot better over the years with the advent of, the internet, and they know they got to keep up with infographics and all that sort of stuff. So, I mean, earlier days, it was really, really dry, but I think it's visually come a long way for sure.
Right. Another thing I would say to that, it's probably buried among all the other stuff that you see on the internet. So we are just helping you undig that huge pile of other stuff on the internet. So when we look at the recommendations, when we say cups of dairy, I don't mean physically a whole cup of cheese, and a cup of milk and a cup of, so that's 3 or whatever. So a cup equivalent, so 1 ounce of cheese would be a cup equivalent of dairy, if that makes sense. So it's getting your calcium needs and protein, but specifically calcium is why it's focused. So, if there's lactose intolerance, we can get calcium from other foods, of course. And you can look into those lactose-free options as well. But so when they have dairy and it says cup equivalents, that does mean, 1 cup of milk, 1 cup of yogurt, but the rest are different portions. So it's a half a cup of cottage cheese, 1 ounce of cheese. Am I missing any other dairy?
Sounds
okay.
Good.
We cover the basics.
Yeah.
And
again, these graphs are in that document, so you'll be able to kind of look at that across. Yep.
Right. My hair is driving me crazy. Okay.
It looks fine for our YouTube viewers.
Okay, that's better.
Podcast people are like, what's going on? Oh, Danielle's working on her hair right now. So
okay, so grains and protein is in ounces. And so for ounces, again, that's kind of like 1 slice of bread is an ounce equivalent. So you want to look into those fine print when you're reading that. And then the fruits and veggies are also in a cup. So when we talk about that, it's, a cup raw versus a half cup cooked. So there's differences in even the fruits and veggies when it's talking about cups. So one thing that's really interesting is you'll find for the younger age group, even up into the older age group, you are getting the higher recommendations of dairy than fruits and veggies. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So I think most people are highly focused on the fruits and veggies, which we do want to focus on those because the the intakes are definitely too low. Um, but we just really want to also think about calcium and how important that is for growing children and their
Yep.
bones. And then obviously for calcium to work well for your bones, you need the vitamin D. That's really low in our food supply. So obviously milk is one source. Kefir, some kefirs are fortified with vitamin D, and some yogurts are. And then salmon also is another source. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there's very few sources of vitamin D, and the calcium, we need to make sure we're getting adequate calcium as they grow.
And
So
that's, you're right. So obviously you're right. So vitamin D, it's tough to come by naturally. We know that the sun doesn't give us vitamin D. It helps our body synthesize vitamin D, right? So it actually kind of kicks off the manufacturing of it, if you will. And so getting a little bit of sunlight, you don't need a lot. You don't need to be out there laying out there for an hour to get, vitamin D to start synthesizing. You just need 5 to 10 minutes ish, right? So that really helps. That comes in through, of course, our skin, which is an organ. But going back to what you had said about the seafood, several foods are higher in vitamin D that do fit that seafood category. So basically your fatty fishes, which again, this is one of the reasons we recommend that in our first pillar of the 4 pillars is lean meat, seafood, and dairy. Herring and sardines and et cetera. And there's, things that maybe kids don't like, livers and liver oils and whatnot, but canned tuna is a really great source of this as well. It does exist in egg yolks. So I know some people get spooked by yolks. In fact, I saw a post today that was hilarious. It had, I think it was out of the UK. It was like Daily Mail. They literally had 2 different headlines on the same day. One that said like yolks are bad and one that said yolks are good, So it's like, it's that classic, back and forth, but egg yolks, mushrooms, et cetera. And so, and then as you said, there's vitamin D, fortified foods, et cetera. So it is there. It's just that we haven't really purposed to make sure that we're being diligent to get that vitamin D in there. So a couple things to think about when it comes to kind of those actual foods.
yes. And some of the foods that you mentioned, like the mushrooms, they have to be exposed to sunlight to have the vitamin D in there. So just read the label well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So then where were we? Okay. And the next point I just wanted to point out was the recommendations for grains is also higher than protein. So if you look at the ounce, for example, females, their calorie range when they're older might be the 1400 to 2200, and their grain goal is 5 to 7 ounces, and their protein goal is 4 to 6 ounces. So that's just one example, but all of them are very similar, off by 1 ounce. The proteins on the lower end, on the lower recommendation. So yeah.
Very cool.
Any questions about that?
No, it sounds good.
Okay. So I think now we're just going to swing to how we can improve these scores. We don't really like the 61, but it is better than the 51. So how can we increase all of them? Yeah. So I think the first one that we mentioned, like those areas of decline, from the 2 to 4 year olds, and then it goes down from there. Like a window of opportunity would be work on getting some counsel for that picky eating, because it's not it's not if it will happen, it will happen. If it's passes quickly, then that's fantastic. But for some kids, it does not pass quickly. And so how to get out of it, you would want to look into, especially the division of responsibility by Ellen Satter. She's a dietitian and a feeding expert. Her models are internationally known. And so the division of responsibility is just the parent role and the child role. And so this is really important for grandparents to hear, like you said, because if the child is going through picky eating and they get these rules from parents, and then the rules are completely different from grandparents at their house, that can be really confusing to the child and make it a lot harder. So kind of look into that Ellen Satter division of responsibility, and look at how what you're supposed to focus on in feeding the kids, and then what the child is supposed to focus on. And one thing is to stay in our role, we can't influence portions. Okay. So the the big picture here is we're not wanting our kids to eat more. That is not the goal. So how we increase the portions to where they need to be, or the recommendations, is simply providing it more frequently. So providing the fruit at a snack, providing the vegetable at a snack, providing the fruit. I try to provide fruit twice a day, veggies twice a day, and hopefully more if possible, with the snack opportunities. So, and then of course you can do that with every food group. So the dairy and the whole grains, etc. So,
Yep.
So increasing frequency, not portions. And then the parent modeling or the grandparent modeling, increasing these nutrient dense foods in their diet without pressure is a really great way to get started. Is simply you guys as parents and adults, grandparents, everybody, learn what those nutrient dense foods are and try to increase them. And you're going to be already setting a good example for everyone around you. So,
yep, that's so big. I think we've said it before. It's cliche, but this stuff is more caught than taught, right? So it's one thing to tell a kid, you should be eating these foods. It's another thing for that child to see you enjoying those foods consistently, not as part of some crazy diet or some January 1st resolution, but day in and day out. It doesn't mean you can't have fun foods. No one's against fun foods. I consume fun foods. But you should really be looking at...
Or sometimes foods.
Sometimes foods. I like that. That's a good one. Yeah. But, you're talking 85%, 90%, 95% of the time, what does your intake look like to a child, And so remember, they're catching lessons more than perhaps, And so this is one of those big areas. And again, I love leaning into the adult side of things, but that cannot be understated, the importance of them seeing this, not just hearing this.
Right. The pressure at the table, is just not helpful for anybody. It increases the stress for the parents or the grandparents, and then does not encourage your child to eat what you want them to eat.
And I know you said this, right? Like, it's the parent's role to provide the options, not necessarily enforce the portions. Is that right? Yep. So think about that, right? And for those of us that, or maybe around our age, we still had parents that grew up under their parents who lived and breathed, it seemed like, you sit there till you're finished, like you finish your plate. Look, it came from a good intention, like you mentioned, but it's been a disaster for Americans in general.
Yeah.
It's not working.
Right.
And so just remember that it's your job as the parent, and you can, correct me if I'm stating this wrong, but to provide the options, but not to enforce portions.
Right.
So was that an accurate kind of portrayal of another kind of summary point?
Yeah, the parent role is, to provide the what and the when and the where. And the child role is to decide if he or she will eat the food provided and how much.
Wow, so, I love that.
Yeah. And then, so the last tip I would say is, because, whole grains is pretty low, I would like to give a couple ways to look for these whole grains when you're in the grocery store. So the first way is to just look for that whole grain stamp. It's yellow. It says 100% whole grain on it. And so that's probably the easiest one to see that on a box of crackers or bread or a box of cereal or something. The second one would be look in the ingredient list and look for the word whole, such as whole wheat, whole grain corn, whole grain barley. So WHOLE is what you're going to be looking for in the ingredient list. And then some other grains that don't have the word whole, that, are, if they're in, the top ingredients, so brown rice or other colored rice, popcorn is a whole grain, oatmeal, wheat berries, bulgur, and cracked wheat, bulgur or cracked wheat, and then wild rice. So I think those are really helpful ways to grocery shop. And then if you're looking at like the nutrition facts panel, the dietary fiber is going to be pretty close to 3 grams or 5 grams on these products. So You're not looking for something that's super high in fiber, like 10 grams per serving. Just around the 3 to 5 is perfect. You're probably selecting a whole grain. If you just want to look at the dietary fiber, that's great. Otherwise, that whole grain stamp, the ingredient list, and those other whole grains that you can look for. So,
That's awesome.
yeah.
Well,
I
that
think
sounds
we've
good.
covered it.
Very cool. Well, yeah, as we said at the top, this is just a great topic to cover today of all days. And so, if again, if you're a parent, you're a grandparent, you've gotten saturated with some information, but if you're still looking for that clarity or you're looking for that context with you, with your family, with your children, with your grandkids, if we can be a resource to you, Danielle specifically, because if you reach out to us on this topic, you get to work with Danielle. You don't have to worry about working with me. It's a good thing. Okay. So, yeah, we would love to help. So if you've got concerns, we touched on lots of things, not only from, 2 to 4, a lot of great, stuff being done there, but then all the way up through age of 18. So if you've got these kids, if you've got picky eating, if you've got, questions about that parent role, the child role, etc., we would love to help. And so be sure to reach out to us. You can just reach out to us via our website. That's imagonutrition.com/contact. I think it's got a contact form that goes to both of us. And like I said, you'll hear back from Danielle on the family nutrition side of things. So with that, thanks so much for listening. Of course, Danielle, thanks for doing the homework on this one. I had it pretty easy. I just got to kind of sit back and learn as a dad and listen, and have got some considerations that, I can take now to the table and to the kitchen for our own home. So with that, if this podcast was helpful, we would love for you to leave a review. Let us know how we're doing. Let us know how you're liking it. And feel free to share with a friend. Share with the other, moms in your circle, the other dads in your circle. We'd love to just help as many people as possible for free with this podcast. And so if you are on social media, you can reach out to us there, or at least just follow us. We're going to be cranking out, more and more content in the days and weeks and months ahead. And so you can follow us across any of the major social media platforms at Imago Nutrition. That's IMAGO, Imago Nutrition. And as always, I'd like to thank the band Happy Pill for our theme song, Thinkin Bout Food. We'll see you next time.